So let's start with the new chapter, which is from the GARP material. It is chapter 5 from module 2, and it's a small chapter, so we'll try to see if we can close this quickly. It's on the semi-supervised learning. So what is semi-supervised? Semi-supervised learning means that you have a bunch of data and some portion of this data is labeled and some portion of this data is unlabeled. Generally the volume of y is going to be more than volume of x. Okay, so this is semi-supervised. There can be, see, one of the basic intuition of solving this kind of problem can be that you take x portion of the data and you use supervised learning. You know, if your x and y is like lots and lots of data, millions or billions or trillions of data, and you can, even if you ignore some portion of this data, you will still be left with a lot of data, then you can just take x in isolation and do supervised, or you do only y in isolation and you do, unsupervised. However, if your volume of data is not too much, then you need to find some ways where you can use x and you can use this to find some methods to label y, and then you use x plus y together. Okay, so that's how fundamentally unsupervised learning works, where we start with a small set of labeled data, we see what information it can provide, and then we try to apply this on the unlabeled side of the data. Now, just to make things clear, there are a few assumptions that your semi-supervised learning needs to make sure of, or especially on the y portion of this data, which is the unlabeled portion of this data. There are 3 assumptions and they are important. You should know these assumptions. The first assumption is it's called the clustering assumption. And this means that your unlabeled data, let's suppose this is your unlabeled data. Okay, it needs to be present in such a manner that that there are some kind of dense regions and you can form some kind of clustering. That's the data needs to be kind of isolated. The second assumption is called the smoothness assumption. And this smoothness assumption means that the demarcation of boundaries between various regions, like in this case, this is the demarcation of boundary, is smooth. Okay, you don't want to have data that is too much overlapped with each other. And the third assumption is called the manifold assumption. Which means that the observed data points are concentrated along the along the dimensions substructure. So which means that in a 3-dimensional space, let's suppose we are talking about 3-dimensional space, there is a possibility that all of your data points for a particular, say, kind of a class, they are concentrated in such a manner that it is kind of the surface of a spherical object, kind of a notional spherical object. So that means it's kind of a lower dimensional space. So these are the 3 assumptions that needs to be verified before we can proceed with any of these techniques for semi-supervised learning. Now there can be fundamentally two ways in which you can process data for semi-supervised learning, and one is called as transductive approach and one is called as inductive approach. Okay, so in case of transductive approach, what happens that any additional data point that comes in, you find out what is the nearest, you don't train a classify or you don't do anything beforehand, and any additional data point that comes in, you find out the closest vicinity of where it belongs to, and then you try to fit it into that kind of a region or that kind of a label. That's the transductive approach. Okay. In case of inductive approach, you try to generalize, you create a generalized model based on the information that is present in the supervised or in the labeled part of your data set, and then you use those models to label your unlabeled data points. Okay, and there are two methods to do this, and we will talk about these two methods in detail. One is called as self-training and the other one is called as co-training. So let's talk about these two methods one by one. Okay, so what happens in case of self-training? As I said, that you have a data set where some portion of the data set is labeled. Let's suppose these are your features and this is your the label. Okay, so this can be your some of the features like about the customer, and this is whether the person is worthy of taking the loan or not worthy of taking the loan. So this is labeled and this is unlabeled. Okay, so now in case of self-training, what you do, you build a model. The model can be a basic model like a KNN or a logistic regression or whatever model you feel is right. So you create a model, and then using that model you build a classifier, and then you use that model to label these data sets, these unlabeled, and then you find out the data point or data points, depends upon how much of speed versus accuracy you would want to maintain. So you find out the data point where the probability of prediction or your certainty of prediction is maximized. Okay, so wherever you find that your probability of being labeled and unlabeled is, let's suppose 99% or 100% or whatever it is, you find that those set of data points or a singular data point, whatever is the case, and then when you find that out, you move that portion of this unlabeled data to labeled side, and then you start building a model using these x plus 1, or we said that this is x and this is y, so x plus 1. You again generalize, create a model, run it on the remaining portion, and then you reiterate. So this happens iteratively. So let's suppose if there are, let's suppose n1 data elements here and n2 data elements here, and if you are picking up one data element, labeling of one data element at a time, this is going to run n2 times incrementally. And once you are done with this runs n2 times, and then you are left with this generalized model of n2. Whenever there is an additional data point that comes in, it is labeled accordingly. So that's called self-training. It works pretty well based on our experience working on these kinds of problems in real life. The other option is called co-training, which is kind of very similar to self-training, a different variant. In this case, what happens, and again it is the same kind of a thing, there is labeled, there is unlabeled, and then there are labels here and labels, unlabeled labels here. Okay, so in this particular case, what we do, there are a set of features. Okay, and this is your label. Now it is quite possible, again let's stick to the example that we were taking, where you have customer data and you are trying to find the credit worthiness of those individual. You can partition this feature space into multiple portions. Okay, let's assume we partition this into 2 portions right now, but we can do multiple portions as well. So let's suppose there is F1 and some stuff here, and then there is some other. So these are non-overlapping features. Let's assume these are your financial features, which means that the salary of that individual, the net worth of that individual, the credit score of that individual, etc., etc. And these are, let's suppose, your demographic features. Okay, the latitude and longitude of that individual, the age of that individual, etc. It's something which is non-financial, but again something that is allowed legally as per the law of the land to do some kind of credit rating. So you split this into 2 different views, and then you generalize these 2 different set of features to create 2 models. Okay, and then you try to use these models in conjunction to label the rest of these things, and whatever gives you the maximum overlap, maximum entropy, or maximum overlap, you find those portions and you include them into them. So portions of this particular model will go here, and portions from this particular model will go here. So we are just trying to take the best of both the worlds. But anyway, it is also, there are similarities between self-training and co-training, that it also incrementally builds up all these data elements into the labeled data one by one. So that's something that is called as co-training. There are some examples in the GARP reading that you can go through, and I don't think there could be a kind of a numerical that you will be asked to give, where they'll say that okay, this is a data point, these are the numbers, try to do a logistic regression, or they give you some kind of a measure like a Euclidean distance measure, and then they tell you that this is how you need to do this in 5 iterations, 6 iterations, and then they try to ask you to label some of the unlabeled data set. That is very unlikely to happen, because they don't want you to do all these calculations again and again. They may ask you some conceptual questions which I assume you would have understood by going through some of this material, but you can again go through some of your content that is available on the GARP side or on the study material that will come with GARP. So that's mostly the end of this chapter. So there is a short reading on pre-processing, especially the unlabeled data set, to make this entire process more optimized. So there are 3 things that GARP recommends. One is on the feature extraction. Okay, where it says that you can do things like principal component analysis and anything else that helps you to narrow down on features, especially if you have too many features on your data set. The second thing that GARP recommends in pre-processing, and this is something that you need to do as a first thing. So you pre-process your data set first, and then you do whether it is co-training or self-training, etc., etc. The second thing it says is cluster and label. Okay, so this implies that if there are fine boundary lines or all the assumptions that we had already discussed, so if there are some fine boundary lines, etc., etc., you can group a set of data points and say that okay, these all come in under one cluster, and you can treat them together. So instead of your iterations being run on the number of data points, your iterations will now run on the number of clusters that you will define. So it will become much faster. And the third recommendation is they call it that as pre-training. Okay, again, this is also related with clustering only, but it says that if you have your decision boundaries between the clusters as kind of a non-overlapped boundaries, you can help, or you can do some sort of unanimous decision making for regions within the closed boundaries. Okay, so these are some of the pre-processing techniques that GARP has suggested, that these all can help you in a faster labeling of your unsupervised or unlabeled data. But I have not seen these things, especially the pre-training, etc., being so functional. But in case GARP asks you that what are some of the pre-processing techniques we can use in a semi-supervised setting, these are the three things you should remember. So it was a small chapter. We have come to the end of chapter 5, and now the next chapter is into reinforcement learning, which will start in the next video. Thank you.